Jesus rose from the dead, but he didn't leave right away. For 40 days he remained here on earth, not as before, but not absent either. His presence no longer followed the same rules. He would appear in the middle of them, talk with them, walk right beside them, and then suddenly he would disappear. And even though this is one of the most powerful moments in all of history, the truth is, almost no one really knows what happened during those days. Most people know the cross, they know the empty tomb, but very few stop to think about what came next. Because after the resurrection, there was no silence. There were encounters, real encounters, deep encounters, life-changing encounters. Moments where Jesus, now risen, began doing something that went far beyond simply proving he was alive. During those 40 days, Jesus wasn't just showing himself like someone trying to prove a point. These weren't random visits. They weren't meaningless appearances. Every encounter had a purpose. Every word carried intention. Every moment was part of something his own disciples didn't fully understand at first. Because while many thought the story had ended with the empty tomb, in reality, it was just beginning. Jesus was preparing something that wasn't just about what they had seen, but about what they were about to live. Something much greater that would not only change their lives, but the course of everything that came after. And maybe, if we're honest, we haven't fully understood those days either. But if we walk through those 40 days step by step, if we pay close attention to each encounter, we're going to discover something that can deeply change the way we see Jesus and the way we understand what he is still doing today. The Bible mentions these 40 days, but it doesn't present them as one continuous story. There's no detailed timeline, no step-by-step account of what Jesus did each day. And that's not a minor detail. In fact, it raises one of the deepest questions. Because if Jesus remained on earth for 40 days after his resurrection, then what was he actually doing during that time? And there's something else we can't ignore. In Scripture, periods of 40 days are never random. 40 days of rain during the flood, 40 days of fasting, 40 days of preparation. Every time that number appears, it marks a process, a time when God is forming something before a shift. Because we're not talking about a few hours or a single isolated moment. We're talking about 40 full days. 40 days where Jesus was alive, present, interacting with his disciples, speaking to them, teaching them, but in a way completely different from anything they had experienced before. Because those 40 days were not just a waiting period, they were a process, a time where something was being formed. Jesus wasn't just appearing, he was preparing. Something you can't see at first glance, something that only becomes clear when you begin to connect each encounter, each appearance and each word he spoke during those days. Because Jesus wasn't acting randomly. He didn't appear without intention. He didn't speak without purpose. Every time he showed himself, there was a reason. And every time he disappeared, there was a reason too. None of this was accidental. All of it was part of something deeper. Because if you look closely, you start to see a pattern, an invisible thread connecting every moment. An intention that goes far beyond simply proving that he was alive. Jesus wasn't just confirming his resurrection. He was preparing his disciples for a new way of relating to him. And that changes everything about how we understand those 40 days. The first day didn't begin with celebration. It began with sorrow. It was still early in the morning when several women made their way to the tomb. They walked in silence, their hearts heavy, carrying spices to anoint the body of Jesus. For them, it was over. The cross hadn't just marked the end of a life. It had shattered every hope they had. They weren't going to witness a miracle. They were going to say goodbye. But when they arrived, everything was different. The stone had been rolled away. The tomb was empty. And in that moment, what should have brought closure only brought confusion. Mary Magdalene was one of them, and when she saw that the body was gone, she didn't think of resurrection. She thought of loss. She thought someone had taken him. And with her heart even more broken, she ran to find the disciples. After they came and then left, Mary stayed. She stayed there, weeping. She remained in the place where everything seemed to have ended, not knowing that everything was about to begin. And in the middle of her grief, Jesus appeared. But she didn't recognize him. She looked at him and had no idea who he was. Because when your heart is filled with pain, sometimes you can't clearly see what's right in front of you. Until he said one word, Mary. And in that moment, everything changed. It wasn't an explanation. It wasn't an argument. It was his voice. Mary saw him, and she knew. The one who had died was alive. The one she thought she had lost was standing right in front of her. And in that moment, all she wanted to do was draw near, hold on to him, and never let go. But Jesus said something that still confuses many people today. Do not hold on to me. Not because he was rejecting her, not because he didn't want her close, but because something had changed. The relationship Mary had known up to that point would no longer be the same, because Jesus didn't rise again to go back to what was before. He rose to lead them into something new, and that first encounter was not just a moment of comfort, it was the beginning of a transformation. Because Jesus didn't first appear to the strong, or to the leaders, or to those who had everything figured out. He appeared to someone who was weeping, to someone who didn't understand, but chose to stay. And that reveals something profound. God doesn't always reveal himself to those who know the most, but to those who, even in the middle of their pain, choose to remain. That same day, while Jerusalem was still filled with confusion, 2 disciples decided to leave. They were walking away from the city where everything had happened, heading down a dusty road toward a place called Emmaus. Their hearts were heavy, their minds full of questions. They talked about everything that had taken place, the cross, the empty tomb, the rumors they couldn't make sense of. Because when something shatters your expectations, it doesn't just hurt, it disorients you. They had believed, they had placed their hope in Jesus. But now, everything seemed to have ended in a way that didn't match what they were expecting. And even though they had heard that the tomb was empty, it wasn't enough to rebuild what had been broken inside them. And as they walked, someone came near. He began walking with them, like any other traveler. It was Jesus. But they didn't recognize him. Their eyes were kept from seeing him clearly, not because he was hidden, but because they weren't seeing clearly. Then he asked them a question. What are you discussing as you walk along? They stopped, surprised. One of them answered almost in disbelief, as if he couldn't understand how anyone wouldn't know what had just happened in Jerusalem. And they began telling him the story, their story. They spoke about Jesus of Nazareth, how he was powerful in word and deed, how he had been handed over, how he had been crucified. And in the middle of it all, they said something that revealed what was really inside them. We had hoped he would be the one to redeem Israel. We had hoped for something else. We had hoped for a different ending. And in those words, we had hoped, you can hear their disappointment. Because many times, the problem isn't what God does, it's what we expected him to do. Then Jesus began to speak. He didn't reveal himself right away. He didn't tell them who he was. Instead, he began to explain, starting with Moses and all the prophets. He showed them how everything that had happened was not a mistake, not a tragedy out of control, but part of a plan that had already been written. And as they walked, something began to change. They didn't recognize him with their eyes, but something inside them was coming alive. Their hearts were burning. Because when truth begins to unfold, there's something within us that recognizes it before the mind fully understands it. When they reached their destination, Jesus acted as if he were going farther, but they urged him to stay. They didn't want the moment to end, even though they didn't fully understand why. And then, in something as simple as a meal, everything was revealed. He took the bread, blessed it, and broke it. And in that moment, their eyes were opened. They recognized him. It was him. The same Jesus who had been walking with them the entire time was right there. But the moment they recognized him, he disappeared, and they looked at each other, their hearts racing, finally understanding something they hadn't seen before. Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road? Jesus didn't just appear to them. He walked with them in the middle of their confusion. He spoke to them in the middle of their disappointment, and he revealed the truth, step by step. Because sometimes, God doesn't reveal everything all at once. Sometimes, he walks right beside us while we're still trying to understand. That same night, as the day that began with sorrow was coming to an end, the disciples were gathered behind closed doors. The doors were locked, not for comfort, but out of fear. Fear that what had happened to Jesus might now happen to them. Fear of being recognized, of being pursued, of being exposed. Everything they had seen at the cross had not only shattered their hope, it had shaken their sense of safety. And in the middle of that tension, that uncertainty, that fear, Jesus appeared. He didn't come through the door. He didn't announce his arrival. He was simply there, suddenly, standing among them. And the first thing he said was not an explanation. It was not a correction. It was a word. Peace be with you. Because when fear fills the room, the first thing the heart needs is not understanding. It's peace. They looked at him, but didn't know how to react. They thought they were seeing a spirit, because what stood before them didn't fit into anything they understood. They had seen Jesus die. They had seen his body on the cross, and now he was there, alive, present, but different. Then Jesus did something that changed everything. He showed them his hands and his side. The marks were still there, not as a sign of defeat, but as evidence. It was him, the same one who had been crucified, now standing before them, not as a memory, but as a reality. And in that moment, their sorrow began to shift into joy, into wonder, into a kind of joy they didn't yet know how to process. But Jesus didn't stop there, because he didn't just want them to believe he was alive. He wanted them to understand what it meant. And in the middle of that moment, he gave them a mission. This wasn't just an emotional reunion, it was a sending, because the resurrection was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of something they were now called to carry forward. From that moment on, something became clear, and at the same time harder to understand. Jesus was alive, but not in the same way they had known him before, because in the days that followed, things began to happen that didn't fit into any category they understood. This wasn't just someone coming back after being gone, and it wasn't a spirit without a body either. It was something different, something that challenged everything they thought they knew. There were moments when Jesus was with them in a completely real way. They could see him, hear him, even touch him. His voice was the same, his presence was unmistakable, and yet there was something about him that had changed, because at other times he would appear without warning, in the middle of a closed room, without opening a door, without making a sound, and just as suddenly, he would disappear in an instant, without explanation, as if he were no longer limited by space or time. But what shocked them the most was something else. In one of those moments, Jesus did something that removed any doubt that this was an illusion. He asked for food, and he ate right in front of them, not as a symbol, not as a metaphor, but as someone real, present, alive. And that created a tension that was hard to process, because how can someone pass through walls and still sit down and eat? How can someone appear and disappear and still have a physical body? None of it made sense based on what they knew. And maybe it doesn't fully make sense to us either. But that's the point. Jesus wasn't returning to what was before. He was revealing something entirely new, and there was one moment that made it even clearer. One of the disciples, Thomas, wasn't there when Jesus first appeared, and when the others told him what they had seen, he couldn't believe it. Not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. So he said something that many of us would probably have said too: unless I see the marks, unless I touch, I will not believe. And days later, Jesus appeared again. And this time, Thomas was there. And Jesus didn't reject him. He didn't shame him. He came close and gave him exactly what he needed. He showed him his hands, his side, and invited him to touch. Because the resurrection wasn't just a return to life. It was an entrance into a new kind of existence, one that was no longer limited as before, but still close, still real, still present. And every one of these moments, as confusing as they seemed, was not random. They were signs, signs that something had changed forever, not only in Jesus, but in the way he would now relate to them. And in the middle of all of this, it wasn't just about understanding. It was also about healing. After days filled with unexpected encounters, with appearances that defied every kind of logic, there was a different moment, a more ordinary one, but deeply transformative. The disciples were by the Sea of Galilee. Some of them had gone back to the only thing they knew how to do for sure: fish. Not because everything was clear, but because in the middle of so much uncertainty, they returned to what was familiar. That night they went out to fish and caught nothing, not a single fish, as if all their effort wasn't enough, as if something was missing. And at daybreak, when the night was over and the exhaustion was setting in, someone was standing on the shore, but they didn't recognize him. Once again, Jesus was there and they didn't know it. From the shore, he called out to them. He asked a simple question, almost ordinary, and then he gave them an instruction: cast your net on the other side of the boat. It didn't make sense, but they obeyed. And in that moment, the net filled up. Suddenly, the impossible happened again, and that's when one of them said it out loud: "It is the Lord." Because there are moments when you don't need to see everything clearly. You just need to recognize his voice in the middle of what's happening. When they reached the shore, they found something unexpected. Jesus had prepared a meal. There was a fire, bread, and fish. After everything that had happened, Jesus was waiting for them, yes, with food, not with a speech, not with a correction, with a moment. A simple moment, but full of meaning. And in the middle of that moment, Jesus turned to Peter. Peter, the one who had denied him, the one who had said he never would, and yet he did. And then Jesus asked him a question: "Do you love me?" Not once, but 3 times. Not to shame him, not to remind him of his failure, but to restore him. Each question was not an accusation, it was an opportunity to rise again, to reaffirm his love, to leave behind the guilt and step into purpose. Because Jesus wasn't interested in pointing out Peter's past, he was restoring his future. And in that moment, everything changed. It wasn't just a conversation, it was a transformation. Because Jesus didn't just appear to prove that he was alive, he appeared to heal what had been broken, to lift what had fallen, to show that even after failure, after denial, after falling short, there is still a place in his purpose. And that wasn't just for Peter. If we look at each of these moments on their own, they might seem like isolated scenes, different encounters, in different places, with different people. But when you bring them together, when you begin to see them as part of the same process, everything starts to make sense. Because Jesus wasn't appearing at random. He wasn't simply showing himself alive so they would believe. He wasn't repeating what he had done before. During those 40 days, Jesus was doing something much deeper. He was forming, he was strengthening, he was preparing. Every encounter had a specific purpose. To Mary, he met her in her pain and taught her not to hold on to what had already passed, but to understand what was just beginning. To the disciples on the road to Emmaus, he walked with them in their confusion and showed them that what seemed like the end had always been part of the plan. To those locked away in fear, he came to them with peace, not just to calm them, but to send them. To Peter, he restored him, not by reminding him of his failure, but by giving him purpose again. None of it was accidental. Every appearance was an answer, every word was preparation, because Jesus wasn't returning to stay. He was preparing others to continue. He was changing the way they would relate to him. Before, they followed him physically. They walked with him, they saw him, they heard him directly. But now, everything was going to be different, because it would no longer be about seeing him with their eyes, but recognizing him with their hearts. It would no longer be about having him beside them, but trusting his presence, even when they couldn't see him. And that wasn't just for them. It's for us too. Because God doesn't always reveal himself the way we expect. He reveals himself the way we need. And that's exactly what Jesus was doing during those 40 days. He didn't reveal himself the same way to everyone, because not everyone needed the same thing. To some, he gave comfort. To others, direction. To others, correction. To others, purpose. But to all of them, he gave exactly what they needed for what was coming next. Because those 40 days were not the end of his story on earth. They were the beginning of their mission. After all those encounters, after every word, every appearance, every carefully guided moment, the final day came, the close of a process. Jesus gathered his disciples one more time. They were no longer hiding. They were no longer confused like they had been at the beginning. Something inside them had changed. They had moved from fear to conviction, from doubt to a faith that was now taking root. And in that final moment, Jesus spoke to them again, not just to remind them of what had already happened, but to direct them toward what was coming next. He spoke about purpose. He spoke about the promise. He spoke about what they were about to receive, because what had begun during those 40 days was not ending there. Something was still ahead. They still needed the power to live out what they now understood, and as he spoke, as he blessed them, something extraordinary happened. Jesus began to rise, right before their eyes. No rush, no confusion, no chaos, like someone returning to where he had always belonged. And they stood there watching, not in fear, not in desperation, but in awe. Because now, they understood. They understood he wasn't leaving them. He was sending them. They understood this was not the end. It was the beginning of something far greater. And when he was no longer visible, they didn't freeze. They didn't feel lost. They were left with certainty. Jesus would no longer be with them in the same way, but he would still be present. And maybe, if we're honest, this isn't so different from what we experience today, because many times we want to see God clearly, directly, visibly. We want immediate answers, clear signs, moments where everything makes sense without effort. We want him to act in a specific way, to respond the way we expect, to show up the way we imagine. But it doesn't always happen like that. Sometimes, God is working, and we don't see it. Sometimes he is guiding, and we don't understand it. Sometimes he is answering, but not in the way we expected. And that can create the same feeling the disciples had during those days: confusion, doubt, uncertainty. But if those 40 days teach us anything, it's this: not fully understanding what God is doing doesn't mean he's not working. Because while the disciples were trying to make sense of it all, Jesus was already preparing. While they were doubting, he was strengthening them. While they thought everything was over, God was beginning something new. And there's something else, something we often overlook. Jesus didn't reveal himself the same way to everyone. To each person, he gave exactly what they needed, no more, no less. Exactly what they needed, because they all had something in common, but they were also different. They had all followed Jesus, but not all of them needed the same thing to move forward. And that's true for us too. God doesn't work the same way in every life. He doesn't respond the same way in every situation. He doesn't lead everyone down the same path. He doesn't reveal himself in just one way, because each of us has a different story, a different process, and also a different calling. And just as Jesus prepared each disciple personally for what was coming, he is still doing the same today. He is working in you according to what you need, preparing you, not for what others are living, but for what you are called to fulfill. And maybe that's why there are things you still don't understand, moments that don't seem to fit, processes that feel different from everyone else's. But that's not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that God is dealing with you personally, because your process is not a mistake. It's preparation. Because maybe today you're not seeing Jesus the way they saw him, but he is still walking with you in the very same way. So today, we don't want to stay silent, because understanding this is not just about knowing a story. It's an invitation to trust, even when we don't see everything clearly, to believe, even when we don't fully understand, to keep moving forward, even when the process doesn't make sense in the moment. Because just as Jesus worked in the life of each of his disciples in a different way, he is also working in you, in a personal way, in an intentional way, in a way that you may not fully understand right now, but that has a purpose. And if this message reached your heart, you can respond with a simple but powerful phrase: Jesus, help me trust what you are doing, even when I don't see it. Write it in the comments, make it visible. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share this video with them. Because sometimes one truth at the right moment can change everything. And if this video spoke to your life, subscribe to the channel. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We seek to truly understand them. We look deeper, to see what often goes unnoticed. And if you want to keep discovering the most powerful stories in the Bible, I invite you to watch the other videos here on the channel. Because maybe the next message you hear will be exactly what you need to understand what God is doing in your life today. Until next time, may the peace and light of God be with you always.